esteemed and capable mayor, vice mayor, elected officials, pastors, leaders, lottie-dottie, and everybody, thank you for having me this morning. I believe that we live in an hour where people rather be confident by a lie rather than be challenged by the truth. I am eternally indebted to the churches of this community for your forthright prayers and your continued support of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is not my job nor my task, but to speak to culture, but not to adjust to it. My job today is not to be a point of division, but to be a point of unity. Yes. Not to speak against any community, but to be an advancement to the African American people in this hour. Let me apologize to you, the council, for putting you in a position to defend the gospel of Jesus Christ. I will not speak on a matter relative to a sermon that I preached in 2013, but to speak to the state of injustice in Black America in 2018. An author of some 57 literary works, having survived 3 concentration camps, Eli Wesley once said, "The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference." It is amazing when we gauge at the polls of what is taking place, the perplexity of African Americans in this hour. We find the mass indifference, and nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to care that 13 black women were raped in Oklahoma, while the overwhelming consequence, it was not aired on CNN, MSNBC, nor Fox. There's an overwhelming indifference when a woman was snatched out of a hospital and in fact needed care, and nobody seems to care. There's an overwhelming indifference when a musician by the name of Corey Jones was killed just miles away from here, and we still find no justice. I wonder whether or not have we lost our emotion, lost our temperament, lost our backbone when we refuse to care. It was a writer out of antiquity and a great poet who wrote the poem If. And in that poem If, in no uncertain words, if you do not love the ugliness, you'll never be able to love its victims. Because when it comes to victims, you won't choose the pose on how they die. There's so many of us that have high aim but low tolerance for people who suffer. Because suffering makes you look at the inner core of who it is that you are and what it is that you believe. One of the pivotal theological statements of Dr. King was, "I decided to stick with love because hate is too great a burden." It is amazing that people did not understand what Kanye West said after the hurricane hit New Orleans and entirely ravaged the entire city. He said in no uncertain terms that George Bush doesn't like black people. He was talking about the indifference. He was talking about the luxury of trying to make the pose of the people who are victims. In 1984, a rock band by Ford said, "I want to know what love is." And Tina Turner turned around 2 years later and asked the question, "What's love got to do with it?" Many of us haven't found out what that love is. We can't see it measured, and we can't see it acted out. After speaking with individuals who studied at Morehouse and Duke University, I could not find a philosopher or a rhetorician who could pinpoint that demonstration of love. I really didn't see it in our lifetime after pulling the pages of history apart. The first time I saw love demonstrated was when I was in a Chicago airport. And when I was in that airport, I stopped in the men's room. And when I stopped in the men's room, there was a man working in the bathroom. And in the bathroom, he had a bowl of mints, Dixie cups of mouthwash, and 10, he had samples of cologne. And when I walked into the bathroom, you heard all types of strange sounds. You were able to hear and smell all types of pungent smells. But there was Mr. Johnson working in that Chicago airport, singing, passing out mints, giving out cups of mouthwash, offering people samples of cologne. People were coming out of stalls, making all types of noises, all types of pungent smells. And Mr. Johnson was smiling, passing out mints, small cups of mouthwash, and giving out samples of cologne. People came out of stalls and never washed their hands. But Mr. Johnson was still there smiling, passing out mints, small cups of mouthwash. And Mr. Johnson, I asked him, I said, "Sir, how do you do this?" He replied and said, "I only do this because I have love for people. I know they're full of crap. I love them." I love them and exercise the love knowing what they've done, knowing the stench they've left behind, and knowing sometimes they don't even care to wash their hands. The reflection of Christ's love we are supposed to exercise is, can you love people when you know their business? Can you love people when you don't agree with them? Can you love people when they don't come from the same background, the same ideology, and the same economic station? While it is we watch a president sign a tax bill and never mention nothing about the middle class or the poor. Awesome. Dr. King once said the poverty is the bride of crime. And America has absolutely declared war on crime, but doesn't say nothing about poverty. I wonder why it is we are in this sacred place. While we are going to enjoy this breakfast, have we considered the poor? Have we considered the least of these? Those who can't afford to be at this breakfast. Those who can't dress up. But do our actions speak louder than our words? Right. It has to be a season of great discontentment. That there has to be something that you hate. Something that you can't stand. Something that in fact compels you and challenge and to change and challenge you to change the status quo. You ought to be upset under this because hate is a great dislike. It is a seething discontent for something that exists without any reprobate. I don't know how you feel. I absolutely hate where it is we are as a nation. I hate the fact that it is a disproportionate wage when we deal with the economy. We're living in an hour in a space where the 1% of the other 99 run this country. Something ought to upset you that by virtue of the fact the average African American only has $6,000 in their bank account saved up right now. And while we're in this breakfast, we have on $1,200 worth of clothes. Something ought to upset you that we don't even have enough to retire, that our parents are working, and in this hour they can't even receive a gold watch. Something ought to upset you that this is the largest company of generation of black grown people who are living with their parents and have no higher trajectory to do more for the generation behind them. That black people in this hour are the leading consumers in the lace producers. Something ought to upset you that in this hour we are the last hired in the first fire. We have to hit concussions trying to break through glass ceilings. Something ought to upset you that we are raising children in this generation who has a false sense of entitlement, where they have cell phones but can't conjugate a verb. Something ought to upset you. One way or another, where we're spending our last to look the best but feel the least on the inside. Something ought to upset you when you go to church and all you hear about is tithing but not a budget, and how it is you are supposed to live after you give. Something ought to upset you that America can find $1 billion for the lottery but not feed the veterans. Something ought to upset you about the state of education in America, where we will spend more on the military but not mathematics and science. Something ought to upset you that the dropout rate is rising at a record proportion. Our young people are leaving high school at the 11th and 12th grade and don't even know that Bethune-Cookman, Florida A&M, and Edward Waters is an option. A mine is a terrible thing to waste, and it shouldn't be an option. It ought to be a mandate. We are raising a generation. For now, we were raised in a generation that said you can't bring home C's on your report card. But now we have thieves graduating with certificates of completion and don't even know how to reduce fractions. There ought to be a better gauge for their accomplishments other than working at McDonald's. But Florida ought to be raising up engineers and computer scientists And we ought not rest until we raise up the black governor for the state of Florida. America, America owes us, Florida, a debt of gratitude. Thank you for delivering Barack Obama to the White House. And if we would have wakened you earlier, we could have stopped Bush. And if we would have stayed awake, we could have kept Donald Trump at the casino. You ought to be upset. You ought to be angry. Somehow or another, that Lady Liberty has her blindfolds on too tight. That black people can't see justice in this hour. When it is that the killer of Trayvon Martin is still walking free. That ought to upset you. When we find no justice for Sandra Bland, that ought to upset you. When the killer Michael Brown is still roaming free in a police uniform, that ought to upset you. When the family of Freddie Gray doesn't have justice, that ought to upset you. For the nameless faces, young men and women in the state of Florida that are behind bars but can't find the money to get behind a college desk, that ought to upset you. We're living in an hour, in a time where parents have to take out a second mortgage just to pay college tuition. That ought to upset you. Where it is we have an absence of love when it's modeled and when it's demonstrated. Love has no greater man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. No man takes my life. I lay it down. And when I lay it down, I pick it back up again. We find Jesus talking to those who are astute in John chapter 10. He gives us this parable about a man who is walking from Jerusalem to Jericho. And might I tell you, this man is already bound for trouble because he's headed in the wrong direction. He's headed into the headquarters of the Holy Ghost. It is the epic center for the temple. It is in fact the Mecca for those who worship Yahweh. He leaves Jerusalem to go to Jericho, the seed of polytheism, the seed of is do it your way, the seed where marriage is handled loosely. And walking from Jerusalem to Jericho, and so many of us have graduated from Bible school and we know this narrative all so well. He fell amongst thieves. But nobody tells us why he was beaten. Did they beat him because he had on the latest pair of Jordans? Did they beat him because they were trying to steal his iPhone X? Or did they beat him because he had a different view on marriage? Why did they beat him? Nobody gives us the definition. Was he racially profiled? Or were the thieves actually police officers? Why did they beat him? Because was it a school system that wanted to label him as attention deficit disorder, not realizing he actually had a gift and a talent and needed an uncultivating approach to education? Why did they beat him? They beat him, they robbed him, and they left him half dead. Isn't that the good news of the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ? If in fact they were going to kill him or do him in, they should have killed him. But when you're messing with a child of God, whatever you do, don't leave them half dead. Come on, man. Because they have a 50-50 chance of getting back on their feet again. And there's some people in this room, life tried to leave you half dead. But you can testify, if it had not been for the Lord that was on your side, well, they left him half dead. And you'll notice when they left him half dead, the first persons that walked by him were Levites, politicians. They saw him beat. They saw him stripped. They saw him robbed. They saw him in poverty. I can't touch him because this is election year. Politicians passed him by. I can't touch him because he's not in my voting block. No, I'm not going to touch him because he's not on my door list. The politicians left this young black boy on the side of the road. And if in fact that does not do you good, the gospel shares with us that a preacher then approaches him. And the preacher couldn't even stop to help the injured. He said, no, I can't help him because I'm one of the 100 preachers going to meet with Donald Trump. I can't help him because I can't mess with a little boy who doesn't have enough money. I can't do street ministry because I got to go get on my private jet. I can't mess with a beaten little boy. And here it is, a good Samaritan comes by who doesn't even live in his community, not even knowing him. The Bible records that they pour oil on him, puts bandages on him, and doesn't even know him, but he expresses the real love of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And that is the testimony of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He takes him down to the Embassy Suites, checks him into the hotel, and says, put all the toppings on me. And I don't know, but he raised him up to give and stand and speak for the I Have a Dream speech like Dr. King from osmosis. I know other people would throw you away, but I see value in virtue. I know other people would throw you away, but I've demonstrated the love. Somebody who's been wounded, somebody who's been beaten, who's been thrown away. And that's what Dr. King admonished us to do. Love those who turn fire hoses on us. Love those who release barking dogs. Love those who don't say yes sir and yes ma'am. Love those who don't appreciate the quality of our character. Love those who don't only see the color of our skin. And our commandment today is to love those who are the least of those. Love those who are your enemies, because you don't know that they are helping you. Because the Lord says, I prepare a table before you in the presence of your enemy. If you don't know that you have enemies, that's the reason why these tables are filled this morning. Because love those who don't believe you can't be anything, because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Love those who talk about you, because you can talk about them on bended knees. But I can talk because those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings like an eagle. Love those who are trying to shut doors in your face, because they just don't know there's another one down the hall. Come on. In that old Negro spiritual that we don't sing no more. I want to treat everybody right.
Yes, Lord.
You ought to love people because you know that God, who you don't know who God's going to use. I love you, Mangonia Pop. I love you, protesters. I love you, Mr. Mayor. And don't forget, I'm the coolest monkey in the jungle, and I survive.